I'm going to change the strings today on the Chapman Stick. Got my string set, classic 12 string grand. Got my 3M finishing pads, which I use to clean the fingerboard of any grime and grunge and any little metal filings and so on. Cut the strings short with wire cutters. A ruler to measure the string length beyond the tuning pegs. Headphones, since I don't have an amp here to listen to the tuning. And a flat edge to make sure the fingerboard is flat. This is a special flat edge, super flat, so I can really tell whether I have a high fret or not. First thing I want to do is make sure I know what each tone is, because even though I have a tuner, if that's a G, or D rather, my tuner won't tell me what G that is. It'll just say G. And I just want to make sure that I know what it sounds like so I can tune it close and not too tight. Okay, I'm going to take off the strings. I'm going to just take off a few on one side and then check the flatness with the straight edge here. Yeah, so I have a proper straight edge here. Start taking off that guy. Keep going here, this will take a while. When I change the strings, I take them all off usually. Well, always. It's not like an acoustic guitar that maybe would suffer from having all that pressure with the strings, but so I just take them all off. I'm just going to take a couple of the light ones off and check how flat the fingerboard is. Okay, so there's two off. And I take my straight edge here, put it where those strings were, and I just push down one end or the other, and I can feel a little, you can hear it click actually. I hold down one end, tap the other, and it clicks. I can rock it back and forth. I'm rocking around here. Okay, I've made the adjustment using the handy dandy adjustment wrench and the truss rod. Now it sits perfectly flat. There's no gap in the middle and there's no rock on the edges. So now that I've convinced myself that it's straight enough, I can take off all the other strings, and then when I put on the new strings it should be very close to flat. And then I'll do a final adjustment once I've completely changed all the strings. So we'll take off all the rest of the strings and then we'll clean it up with a damp cloth. And then I'll use my little finishing pads. These are 3M finishing pads. They're mildly abrasive. It's kind of like the equivalent of steel wool, but without the little metal fragments that could get stuck on the pickups and so on. Very handy to remove grime and so on. Okay, I've got all the strings off. Now I'm going to clean it. It's quite dusty. I start with a dry cloth, and then I have a damp cloth I also use, but I use the damp cloth after I've gotten most of the dirt off because I don't want to make any mud. You want to use the damp cloth very sparingly because you don't want to soak the wood, but it's okay to get a little bit on there, and I avoid getting any moisture on the pickup block or any of the metal parts. It's only just to get the grime off the wood, pretty much. So let's just quickly use the lintless cloth here. Pretty low lint anyway. So I'm not going to get a bunch of fuzz from the cloths. Do this part up here especially because that seems to collect a lot of dust. My sticks, I let them sit in a stand all the time, so they're out collecting dust all the time. So they do get dirty. Now I'm going to just do with a damp cloth a bit, just here and there where it needs a little bit more. Very lightly over there because I want to make sure not to get too much water on here. It's just damp enough to pick up the extra dust, but not damp enough to soak into the wood. Okay, that's probably good. And just dry off any excess moisture. Okay. Now, Emmett would probably cringe if he saw me do this, so Emmett, don't look. So I use these abrasive pads. They're called finishing pads. You'd normally use them between coats of varnish to make things stick better, but where I like to use them, I like to use the edge in near the frets in order to get any finger grime off of there. And it's a pretty gentle job, and I usually go over the frets themselves a little bit, mostly to clean them. It's not abrasive enough to really do much to the frets. You'd have to do this forever to make any difference on the frets. And I scour the wood. I'm going to do this over the whole fingerboard. That's it. Pretty much finished the abrasive pad here, the finishing pad. And I've done both sides of every fret and the whole fretboard. And I've done any edges where there might be little dings or scratches that the finishing pad will take those out. And I've also done the back and the sides. I've already done this, I'm just kind of showing you how I do this again. So I do it all the way along, give it a good rub, make sure I get all the finger grease off of there, and get it nice and smooth, make sure there's any dings and scratches kind of get smoothed out. Okay, and that leaves it a little bit of kind of a dust on there from the buffing pad. So I'm going to take that off as well. I use my damp pad for that, or my damp cloth. Just clean off all that stuff really well. And around here, I bring it all the way up to here. On the sides. This is really about getting it all clean. Because I'm going to put some Waco oil on this, and I don't really want to put that on top of the dirt. Clean it all up, and I'm just going to go over that with the dry cloth. Make sure don't leave any moisture. Get all the moisture off. Just check it against the light to make sure it's all dry. Okay, and then once it's all dry, I'm ready for the Waco oil. Okay, I got my tongue oil here. I'm going to use, I don't actually have Waco oil, I use tongue oil. It works really well. So let's use, again, a lint-free cloth. And use very little, just kind of enough to make a damp mark on the wood. And I don't want to get this on any of the metal or fittings or block, just for the wood surfaces. So what I do is I just go like so, That's how much, just kind of enough to make it wet. It's actually almost clear. It looks brown in the video here, but it's nearly clear. And you start up here, and I just go in between the frets. You know, it's pretty hard not to get it on the frets, but I'm going to clean as much of that off as I can once I'm finished applying it. And avoid the damper. But you can see it's enough to make the wood wet, but it's not soaking on there. It's not like painting. You know, it's just enough to just dampen the surface. I should be able to get almost the whole fingerboard done with that one little. I do the whole fingerboard, and it's partly to clean it. You can see there's still little bits of dirt and grime coming off here. Partly to clean it and partly to treat the wood and finish it. Okay, careful not to get it on the block. And at this point there's very little left on the cloth, just barely enough to make dampness on the wood. Because any more than that, and you've got a big cleanup job trying to get everything clean. And for the back, I'll probably put a little bit more on here. Probably could get away with just keeping going on the one I'm working on. I generally try not to get it on the not more than generally. I try not to get it on the truss rod because it's painted. It's not anodized. So I just go up to the edge. The truss rod is recessed enough that it's pretty easy to get it on without put the oil on the wood without getting any on the truss rod. Do back in between the machine heads, around the very top end where the open grain is. Okay, and that's about it. And then from then on, I just dry off whatever's left. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to let it sit for a while. And I'm going over with the dry part of the cloth here. Just want to make sure there's not much oil on the frets. Okay, I think that's good. Now I'm just going to let it sit for a while, and then I'll go over it again briefly with a cloth to take off any oil that might still be there, and then we'll put on the strings. I like to start with a big fat string right in the middle, because it's a little harder to handle, and it's easier to handle without the other strings there, and work my way out. Now I also, on the ball end side, there's the ball that goes in the tail end of the stick. I like to make sure I set the ball properly and horizontally. Make sure it lies on top of the bridge nut, because I don't want to get any kinks or anything. It's more important with the thinner strings. And it's going to go right up to this machine head. Normally I like to leave kind of 2 inches past the end there. I use my little snippers here, but I don't snip it, I just use it to bend. A nice sharp bend there. I don't know if you can see that, but about a 90-degree bend. And that's going to go through the machine head. And I kind of already know which way it's supposed to go. Okay, so I know I want it to go this way. So they all go just the way you think they would, like on a guitar, but except for the bottom one, the 12th and the first string go the other way. Okay, so I'm just going to put that bend through there, pull it tight, and start winding. But all the time making sure that it doesn't pop out of the end. So what I lift it up like that once I've got it started, and that keeps the tail end anchored and the front part tight. So I'm just going to pull that, start winding it in. try generally to get as few winds as you can get away with. You know, don't wind a whole bunch of string onto the machine head post, because it'll just make tuning a lot more variable. Okay, so I pretty much got that first string on. Okay, first string is on. Oh yeah, that's the 7th string. Now the 8th string. Same thing all over again. Okay, at this end, I got a little bit too much length. I really only want 2 inches, 2.5 maybe, and then the bend. So I use my little thing here. Let's see how much we have. My little measuring device. I've got 3 inches, so I'm going to trim a 1/2 inch off that. Okay. So now I've got 2.5 inches, and I'm going to make a bend, 1/2 inch from the edge. Okay, that sharp bend. Okay, and that gives me about 2 inches to wind onto the post, which is more than enough. You can probably get away with 1.5 inches even. Okay, and push it through, pull it tight, and give it a bit of a wind here to get it started. Put the tail piece back in, make sure it's nice and straight. Okay, now I can start winding just like I did the other string. Applying a fair bit of tension over here with this, just to make sure the tail stays in, and to make sure that wind is coming on nice and tight. And I can go like that to lay it down flat and keep the tension. And I just keep pushing down with my left thumb here as it winds on, making sure it all winds on nice and neat. That's pretty good right there. So it's a bit of slack, tight enough it's not going to pop out of each end, but not tuned up yet. Same for both strings. Yeah, I'll put the rest on and we'll come back later. Okay, here's a bit of a close-up of the machine head end. Okay, I'm putting on the 7th, 8th, 9th string, measuring from this machine head, and I want 2.5 inches or thereabouts. So I'm going to trim it off right about there. Alright, 2.5, double check. Okay, that's where I want it. And then I'm going to bend that end 1/2 inch, nice square bend. So that, like so. Set the ball end in correctly. Lay it down. Bring it here. So I put it in there and just wind it around tightly by hand first without turning the machine pegs. Get it down below that piece, give it a bit of a wind so it's nice and tight in there, there's no slack. Okay, before I start winding it, I'm going to double check the ball end is in place. Okay, tension the string and start winding. Okay, just move it off here. Move the edge where I can wind it a little easier. Just pushing it down with my thumb, like so. Especially when it comes around to the first wind, I want it below that entryway. I want it to wind it nice and tight to avoid any changes in tuning. And if I do this right, make sure there's no slack, it'll stay in tune pretty much on the first tuning. Make sure it's in the bridge and the nut properly before you tighten it up too much. And again, I don't tighten it too much at the beginning. And I pull on it here just to seat it there, and the bridge pretty clean. And you know, I might trim just a tad bit off of that more so it doesn't touch the other strings. Okay, this is put on the 6th string now. So I generally put them on from the fattest string to the thinnest, so rather than bass and treble. Just with the idea that the heavier ones are a little harder to work with, except for the outside two, which are a bit of a pain. So there we go, it's nicely wound on. I've trimmed them off a little bit more so they don't touch the adjacent strings. And there we go. The first string and the 12th string are always a bit of a pain because you have to treat them very delicately because the strings are so fine. It's pretty easy to kink them or break them. And also they slip through the machine head hole pretty easily. And they wind backwards, and they have quite a bit steeper of an angle here between the nut and the machine head, which means that they don't wrap nicely underneath. In fact, I start them underneath, and then it usually crosses over to the top by the end. So again, I measure off my 2.5 inches, which is going to be right about there. So I just grab onto it and measure again just to be sure. I could probably take 1/8 of an inch less. Yeah, that's about right. So again, seated, make sure it's properly seated at the base end, the bridge end, or the bottom end of the stick, in the saddle, and the bridge. This last string, like over here, wraps opposite to the 5 adjacent strings. Similarly here, it's going to wrap around this way, counterclockwise. So let's put a bend near the end. And when you put a bend, don't bend it more than once because it'll break, which happened with this string just a little bit earlier. Again, keeping enough tension to keep that string properly seated, the ball end of the string properly seated in the saddle and the bridge. I put my index finger down there just to keep that tension in there, and so the string leads in nice and low, so I get a good couple of wraps before it crosses above. Okay, I think that's good. I've got all 12 done. Now I can start tuning up. I recorded my old strings, this little recorder here, so I could hear what they sound like rather than using a tuner. It's a little quicker, and I'm less likely to tune to the wrong octave, which would not be good. So I play back. I've recorded 4 sounds of the tuner in here. It's playing back, you can't hear it on the video, and then it'll go, I'll just go along tuning like this, and here I like to tune in the place where I'm playing. So on the melody side I'm generally playing around here, so that's kind of tune the melody side in the middle of where I'm playing on the melody side, tune the bass side where I most commonly play on the bass side. And then once I've got it roughly tuned, then I can plug in the tuner and fine tune it.